George's fears about Coronation Street abuser Theo are confirmed as he prepares to step in. George Shuttleworth had already been deeply uneasy about the strange circumstances surrounding Todd Grimshaw and Theo Silverton's wedding in Coronation Street this week. And in tonight's episode, Theo's behavior proved that George's instincts were absolutely right. Theo has been mistreating Todd ever since their relationship began last year. But up until now, the only person who had truly understood just how bad things were was Billy Mayhew. After Todd finally opened up to the vicar about what had been happening, Theo made sure Billy would never be able to expose him. He left him to die during the Corriedale crash, silencing the one person who knew the full truth and keeping Todd trapped under his control. Since then, the situation has only become more disturbing, with Theo's behavior growing increasingly dangerous. At one point, he even ended the relationship himself after threatening Todd with a knife. Sadly, that still was not the end of Theo's hold over him. Earlier this week, Theo secretly arranged for them to get married, with Gary Windus and Maria Connor acting as witnesses. After the ceremony, George was clearly hurt and unsettled by the fact that he had not been invited. He later suggested to Summer Spellman that perhaps Todd had not actually had much of a voice in planning the wedding at all. In tonight's episode, those concerns were proven to be well-founded when George paid Todd a visit, only for Theo to return home while Todd had briefly stepped out. Theo had apparently gone for a run to clear his head after Todd rejected him when he tried to initiate sex. But by the time he got back, it was obvious that his temper had not cooled down in the slightest. Thinking that Todd was in the bathroom, Theo once again began making cruel and degrading remarks. He lashed out about Todd's weight and also mocked him for refusing to sleep with him again that morning. But the moment Theo realized what had happened, everything changed. When Todd came back through the front door and George stepped out of the bathroom, Theo tried to dismiss the whole outburst as nothing more than a joke. Unfortunately for him, the damage had already been done. By that point, George had clearly seen Theo for exactly who he really is. Later, George opened up to Summer about what he had witnessed, explaining that he had been worried for some time because Todd simply had not seemed like himself for months. When Summer asked what they could possibly do to help him, George made it clear that they could not just stand by any longer. In his view, the priority now is getting Todd away from Theo before the abuse escalates even further. Determined to protect him, George later offers Todd the chance to move back into his old room and gives him somewhere safe to go if he chooses to leave. The question now is whether Todd will finally accept the help or whether Theo will once again find a way to pull him back under his control. 8th Coronation Street spoilers for next week, 29th of March to 3rd of April. Next week on Coronation Street, Todd's loved ones begin uncovering the truth about Theo, Maggie confronts Megan, and Debbie gets ready for her appeal. Concern for Todd has been steadily growing over the last few days, especially after George accidentally witnessed what Todd's life with Theo is really like behind closed doors. George had stopped by the flat to see Todd and briefly went into the bathroom while Todd popped downstairs to get some tea bags. Moments later, Theo came home and, believing Todd was in the bathroom, began shouting abuse through the closed door. When Todd then walked back in through the front entrance and George stepped out of the bathroom, Theo quickly tried to laugh the whole thing off. But by then, George had already seen enough to know that something was deeply wrong. George confronted Theo there and then, and made a point of offering Todd somewhere safe to stay right in front of him, making it clear he would not simply stand back and allow his friend to be controlled. After leaving the flat, George later shared everything with a horrified Summer, telling her how much Todd had changed in recent months, and warning that Theo's behavior was far from normal. Those fears only became stronger when Theo later trapped Todd into a shock wedding at the registry office, with only Gary and Maria there to witness it. Because none of Todd's closest friends or family were invited, George became even more convinced that Todd would never have gone through with it willingly under normal circumstances. Next week, Christina and Summer fill Glenda and Sarah in on everything George has said. The revelation leaves them shaken as they slowly begin piecing together the reality of what Todd has been going through. When Todd later arrives at the Undertaker's and realizes the conversation is about him, he quickly shuts it down and fiercely defends Theo. But George remains completely unconvinced by his attempts to brush things aside. Sarah then takes her concerns to Gary, who works alongside Theo. At first, Gary struggles to believe what he is hearing, but as Sarah outlines the repeated warning signs in Theo's behavior, he starts to see the situation in a very different light. Later, when Todd heads back home and appears to be mentally preparing himself before going inside, Gary intercepts him and insists on coming along. As soon as the front door opens, Theo starts shouting out, completely unaware that Gary is there too. The way Todd responds in Theo's presence tells Gary everything he needs to know. By that point, any remaining doubt is gone. The following day, when Theo turns up for work, Gary hands him his tools and tells him he is finished at the yard. Theo accuses him of overreacting, but Gary is in no mood to listen. Instead, he furiously warns Theo to watch his back before throwing him out. Meanwhile, George continues trying to find ways to support Todd and later returns to the flat with a bag packed full of essentials. He explains that it is there for whenever Todd feels ready to leave Theo and make his escape. Sadly, Todd refuses to seriously engage with the idea and remains unwilling to accept help. Things become even more tense when Theo later discovers the bag. Forced to think on the spot, Todd quickly lies and claims George only gave it to him because he knows about their supposed plans to move to Belfast. That excuse leads Theo to take Todd to the bistro so he can challenge George face to face. Putting him under pressure in front of Christina, Sarah, Summer, David, and Brian, Theo demands answers about what George has supposedly been saying behind his back. Meanwhile, Sarah and Summer are left deeply concerned when it dawns on them that Todd could actually be preparing to leave Weatherfield with Theo. Later in the week, Todd tries to repair things with George after their earlier confrontation. George makes it clear that he will always be there for him, but when he gently asks why Todd is so determined to move to Belfast, Todd sidesteps the question and refuses to give a clear explanation. The big question now is whether Todd will be able to find the strength to break free from Theo before it becomes too late.